Good evening, and welcome to Let's Just Talk with Hamid. Today, we have the pleasure of bringing our cameras to the space of the Unitarian Universalist Church. Reverend James has gracefully welcomed us into his space and is sponsoring this episode tonight. Without further ado, today we'll be bringing you and asking the grand existential question that has eluded humans for centuries. The question for today is, where does the universe and humanity come from? To help us answer this question, we are joined by esteemed physicist and astronomer Dr. Aileen O'Donoghue from St. Lawrence University and the Reverend James Galasinski for the age-old debate between science and religion. As always, each guest will have 5 to 7 minutes to offer their perspective on the issue. We are going to start with the Reverend James, since we are in his space today. Then we're going to move on to Dr. Aileen O'Donoghue. Reverend James, you have the floor.
Well, I thought I would just start out with a more personal story that actually is still kind of raw with me. A friend of mine, a colleague, and monk and Catholic priest in Albuquerque, New Mexico, was recently killed in a car accident. He was 35 years old. I was very close friends with him and his parents. And in many ways, I'm still grieving that loss. He was struck by a car that was drag racing. And he was leaving the abbey where he lived at after spending a day of visiting the sick and poor. And he was just going to get a bite to eat late at night and tragically got hit and killed. And it threw me into a kind of existential kind of rage. And why does bad things happen to good people? And many other big questions came up. And what has given me comfort in this may not give many other people comfort, but it has given me comfort. And that is Father Graham. And all of us came from nothing, and it's to nothing that we return. Now, to me, the nothing is a peaceful place. The nothing is also a creative space. It's a space of potentiality. And some people may call that God, maybe not. I don't know. But I think that's where we all came from and where we are all going to. Nothing. I consider myself a religious naturalist. I'm a Unitarian Universalist minister. My orientation is a religious naturalist. I find wonder, awe, reverence, and all the wonderful things of religiousness in the natural processes of life. Not just walking in nature, although that's true, but just in everyday encounters. I don't need a supernatural being or a supernatural entity or a supernatural world to give me a sense of spirituality. I consider myself a religious naturalist.
First, I'm sorry for your loss. And second, thank you for sharing your story with us. We are going to go to Dr. O'Donoghue so we could hear what you have to say about where we come from and where the universe comes from.
Well, humans, we, first and foremost, are of the earth. That earth formed 4.5 billion years ago, and life appeared very early on, is very simple life. And it took it 4 billion years or so to figure out evolution. And then in a flash, in terms of the time scale of the Earth, 600 million years, we went from pond scum to people. And so we emerged from this long path of evolution. And we are, I don't know when we became more conscious of our existence, of our place, and asked these existential questions. I'm not sure the squirrels do. Maybe the whales do. I don't know what they're singing down there. But this is part of our emergence. And I don't know if we're emerging towards something or not. My spiritual tradition is Christianity, Catholicism. And so I do see there being in the universe just an energy of love. And I refer to that as God, but it is inclusive and it's loving, and it is a part of the fabric of the universe, but it's not a fabric that really gives us data. Where did the universe, so Earth, we emerged from Earth. Where did Earth come from? Earth came from the stars. And it formed from the material that emerged from the Big Bang, which was primarily hydrogen and helium. And then the hydrogen and helium formed stars. The stars then themselves created all the other elements we're made of. We all are made of a lot of hydrogen. There's 2 hydrogens in every water molecule in our bodies. But all the rest of the stuff, the carbon in our skin, the calcium in our teeth, the iron in our bloodstream, carrying oxygen to our brains, the oxygen that we're breathing, all of this is from the stars. We're truly, the cosmos is flowing into us, flowing through us, flowing out of us, and we're part of this great, expansive, amazing thing called the universe. And where did it come from? Well, when we look out at the other galaxies, what we discover is that they're all moving away from us, and the more distant ones are moving away faster. It's like they're running away. Do we stink? I had a shower after my gym. And it's like, no, actually, if they're all just running away, they wouldn't necessarily be running away with the more distant ones running away faster. The way to explain that is that the universe itself is expanding. Well, if it's bigger now than it was when I started speaking, that means it had to be smaller. And we can measure the expansion rate, so we can, math is amazing. You just put a minus sign in it, it goes back together. And when was it all together? Oh, about 13.8 billion years ago. What happened 13.8 billion years ago? Well, we don't know.
Okay.
Try and figure it out. But there are lots of ideas, and as James was referring to nothing. Well, in physics, there is no nothing. In physics, the quantum vacuum, which one of the ideas for where the universe came from is that there was nothing. There was a physics nothing. There was a physical nothing, which is a quantum vacuum. And in a quantum vacuum, particles come in and out of existence all the time. And one of those particles that came out into existence just blossomed into the entire universe. And here we are. And was God there? Was that loving creative energy? Is that why the universe emerges? We don't know. We can measure the galaxies. We can measure all kinds of things in the history of the universe. And we're working on figuring out where it came from. But the very fact that here we are, creatures of the mud, crawling out of the mud on this planet that is a dust ball on the Orion spur of the Perseus arm of the Milky Way galaxy, which is an obscure galaxy in the outer hinterlands of our supercluster Laniakea. We emerge from the mud here, and yet we've mapped the galaxies. And we have minds that look up at the stars, and they write poetry and symphonies and differential equations. To me, there's some energy, some entity, some love, some creativity in the universe that is bigger than us. And that's what I call God.
Right.
But God doesn't produce any data, so we can't study it with science.
Gotcha. That was fascinating and beautiful to listen to. And so I wanted to give a little bit of an Islamic perspective to the conversation, and then to go back to the idea of the Unitarian Universalist of we come from nothing, so that you can explain what nothing means to you. And so in Islam, like, we describe God as this infinite being who has inexhaustible power, who possesses intentionality and will, and he has no human or animal attributes or forms of nature or appetite. And the religion teaches us that God is genderless, does not have, does not experience human experiences and tiredness. And so God is the ultimate, the most, powerful being that wills the world if he wishes it, wills things into existence, right? And so, for example, you speak of the Big Bang earlier. One thing I want us to talk about is there any correlations between what we call science and what we call religion? Because in this short text of the Quran, there is a lot of prophecies that were written, thousands of years before, that were predictions that are happening now. Like the Big Bang was predicted before we knew what the Big Bang was. And so you can find that in chapter 21:30 of the Quran. And so going back to you, what do you mean by nothing? And you can then explain, what was there before the Big Bang.
By nothing, I guess I'm speaking more metaphorically, and that to try and differentiate from a creation or something that we were created.
Right.
So I actually, you said the word a bunch of times. I really love it. Emergence. To me, that we've emerged, and out of this process of evolution, we emerged. And I don't know if we're going forward or backwards or sideways. I don't know which. So I agree with you, and that over time, we developed a self-awareness. We had developed meaning. We developed emotions. We developed this ability to love children. Like all these wonderful things that go along with being human. Now, I feel like so by nothing, I just mean to differentiate from like a traditional view of God.
Right.
Yeah.
And then Dr. O'Donnell, what was there before the Big Bang?
Oh, we don't
mentioned
know.
it. We don't know.
We don't know. And one of the things about the physics theories is that space and time are constructs of this universe.
Of our minds.
No, they're constructs of this universe.
Okay.
We can measure them.
Okay.
So they exist in the universe, not just our heads, because there is an arrow of time.
Right.
And so, no, they are things we can measure, and so in science, that's real.
Right.
And the flow of time is in our minds, but time, we have atomic clocks that they don't have any emotions. Their time always moves at the same rate.
Right.
And so, since space and time are constructs of this universe, back when it was t equals 0, before time began, there was no time.
Right.
So you can't talk about before the Big Bang.
Okay.
And Carl Sagan, or no, not Carl Sagan, Stephen Hawking, what he said was that to ask what was before the Big Bang is a poorly phrased question. It's like asking, what's north of the North Pole?
Right. We don't know. It's the thing of like the Schrodinger's cat, of like, if you put a cat in a box, is it alive or dead? We don't know because we have to open the box to observe it.
Right.
So unless we observe it, how do we know? Okay. And so do you want to take a minute to respond to this question?
No, I'm fine.
Right. That's a great answer as well. So you both talked about emergence, that word itself. So the word emerge assumes that something comes out of either somewhere or nowhere. And so the question for me then becomes, can something come from nothing?
Well, I definitely think life can come from not life. And that to me, that's a really deep question. That's
it is profound.
That's
and it has to start with defining nothing.
Yeah, what is nothing? We're talking about absolute nothing?
Is it a philosopher's nothing? Is it a physicist's nothing? A physicist's nothing is a seething particle energy sea. It's busy. There's all kinds of stuff in nothing. There is no nothing.
Does everything have to have an origin? Or a creator, in a sense? Because what we're trying to define here in this topic is, where do we come from? And there's many philosophies and schools of thoughts out there that try to tell us what that answer is.
And what I was taught as a little child in Sunday school was that, here was the mud of the earth, and God made a little clay human, and it came to life, and it's like, and kind of plunked us down artificially.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And I think that view has misserved us.
Right.
In that it has made us something artificial on Earth. When no, the mud was already alive, and we just kind of emerged from it through pond scum, and then, fish and amphibians, and, all those things. And it took, a few 100 million years. That God's creativity is if God creates the universe. And I don't know if that's true.
Right.
But if there is a creator, the creation was kind of just setting forth the laws of nature that are self-creating. That as soon as there was a bug on Earth, given 5 billion years, you were going to get puppies.
Right.
But I don't know. Maybe the rare thing is going from bugs to puppies.
Okay.
Well, I have an interesting, so I like, for my own theology and my own spirituality, I like mystery.
Okay.
I don't like mystery novels. I don't read them, but I like mystery. I like the unknown. And I don't like attaching things to the mystery. I like just not knowing.
Right.
So I like the question, what is nothing? And can we come from nothing? I love that, because there's a sort of mystery to that. To me, that gets me into sort of a divine space.
Right.
But another question that gets me into that space is, where did the laws of physics come from? I mean,
well, it's a mystery.
Yeah. See, I love it.
And there are, I know of physicists who believe in God because the fundamental constants of physics, the strength of gravity, the strength of the attraction between positive charge and negative charge, that if they were a little bigger, a little smaller, that we wouldn't have atoms and planets and galaxies.
Right.
And there are some people I know who believe in God because those constants are so finely tuned. But for me, I went through a crisis of faith. I guess as a college student, I had spent the evening with a friend who was suicidal. And I was trying to talk her out of suicide. And it was very difficult. And I ended up calling for help, and that help ended up calling some psychiatric services, and my friend ended up hauled off in handcuffs to a padded room. And I was walking home back to my dorm in the snow. This was in February in Durango, Colorado. Mm-hmm. And I was walking, and where we got, 100 inches of snow. I mean, it was insane. And I stood there in the snow looking up at the stars. And for the first time in my life, all I saw were stars and the universe. And it's as though all my life before I had seen kind of God as a kind of a ceiling that was, And that's the title of my book, that there is no ceiling. The sky is not a ceiling. It's the whole cosmos out there. And if gravity would just let go, you could fly off into it. And wouldn't that be cool? But that crisis, I then came back to faith with a very different perspective. Mm-hmm. And I won't hang any of my faith that there is this loving energy to the universe. A being, an energy, I don't know. But I can feel like I resonate with it. I am in touch with it sometimes. Right. And to hang it on something as silly as what the value of the gravitational constant is, it's like, oh, you're setting yourself up for standing in the snow in Durango, Colorado, and you find out, oh, there's a perfectly reasonable reason why it had to be that number. And then where's your faith? So
just to circle back a little bit to the religious perspective of things, I apologize for my ignorance when it comes to, the Unitarian traditions, but what book do you base your teachings on? A book and so on?
We do not base it on a book, but either maybe all books or no books, one or the other. So we have it's a creedless faith tradition, and we recognize that everyone is not going to believe the same exact things. Right. We do have some principles that kind of guide us. Right. We have sources that we go to for,
Right. Yeah. And so that's the distinguishing feature between this branch of Christianity and others, is that the Unitarian traditionalists don't have universalists, to retract there, don't have a creed. And so you were speaking about the Big Bang, which made me think of the Big Bang Theory, which is a TV show that I love very much, not the theory itself. And so that TV show has
I went to graduate school with Sheldon. I know all about it.
Perfect. And so that TV show has a sequel to it, Young Sheldon.
I've been watching that. I'm binge watching Young Sheldon, yes.
So that's one of my favorite TV shows right now. And so there's a scene in there where, they talk about where does the universe come from, which inspired this episode. And so he talks about, confusing, because the pastor says something like, you should believe in God because there is a possibility that there's 50-50 possibility that there's God or there's no God. And he says, well, you're confusing possibility with probability. That's like saying if I go home, I might find $100 million or I might not. That's not 50-50. And so that got me, and then they talked about some verses in the book of John. And so I went and I pulled out the quote from the book of John, chapter 1, verse 1, 9, and 14. And so I wanted to read it to you all. And as a Unitarian, you can tell me what you think of it. And as a scientist, you can tell me what you get from this. So the chapter is called The Word Becomes Flesh. And in verse 1, they say, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the meaning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome. And so, it continues with verse 9. I'm not going to sit here and read it. You could go read it by yourself. And all the way through 14, where the Word becomes the flesh. And so another thing that I noticed when I was continuing this reading in the book of Genesis, which is the first page of the Torah, they talk about this as well, that the 6 days that it took for God to build it. And in the Quran, this is also another observation that you can see when you read it. So there's a similarity between the Abrahamic faiths. Of course, the Quran's definition of numbers is a bit different from others because the book came on later on. And so what do you think of the idea that all three Abrahamic faiths make this analogy to the supreme deity that has created this world that we live in, and what's your take on it? So we can begin with you and then go to Dr. O'Donnell.
Okay, so a couple things. One is, as we sort of talked about, humans are in this process of meaning making.
Right.
We're all in this self-awareness, reflecting on, and we have evolved to love stories.
Right.
Who doesn't love a good story, right? Religions have been using stories since as far as we know.
Right.
The 7-day creation account, it's really 7 days. It was deliberately 7 days because those Jews writing that wanted to reinforce the most important Jewish holiday, the one that happens every week, Shabbat or Sabbath. God rested on the 7th day. That's the theological meaning of that. Now, it's beautiful sacred poetry, and it spoke to people, obviously, and still speaks to many people. I regard it as sacred poetry. I don't regard that as scientifically...
The explanation for...
Yeah.
Yeah, it's scientific. There's no science in that, except that people are people are here now.
Right.
Well, how did we get here? We had to come from something. And we can trace our biology, our chemistry, the physics of our elements, all the way back to actually 10 to the minus 44 seconds after the Big Bang. 10 to the minus 43 seconds after the Big Bang. After time began. We don't know what happened in that first 10 to the minus 43 seconds. It's where our physics equations just can't get there. And so that science doesn't say anything about the word or,
right.
It just says that after 10 to the minus 43 seconds, the universe started expanding and cooling and all of this amazing stuff happened that eventually led to us.
Okay.
And it was a series of accidents. But there were so many accidents that's, people say, well, you couldn't have created us by accident. And it's like, there had to be somebody that planned it. And one of my questions now was, all right, who planned English?
Right. So, earlier you mentioned that there were a lot of accidents that led to the creation of us, as in, if we can
The
even...
emergence.
The emergence
of us.
Emergence of
Yes.
us, as if we can even understand what we are in the first place. And so, could you tell us about how many accidents were there, and can you tell us about some of those accidents? And what they did?
What I can say is that at last count, with using the Hubble Space Telescope and other advanced telescopes, we go out and count the other galaxies in the universe. And at the current time, our count is a few 100 billion galaxies. So if the chance of life is 1 in 100 billion, there should be life in every galaxy. And so in those 100 billion galaxies each has hundreds of billions to trillions of stars. And so, you can just see if the chances of life on a planet around a star is 1 in 100 billion, there's life all over the place in the universe. It's crowded. And so those galaxies, this is part of what I study is so within those galaxies you have stars and planets and these physical processes that went on Earth went on elsewhere. We assume there's probably, I think most astronomers assume there is life elsewhere, and maybe technological life. But given that it took Earth 4 billion years to figure out evolution, maybe technological life is the hard thing to come by. Mm-hmm. But when we look out at the universe, there are some weird things, like the fact that the galaxies aren't evenly distributed. Right. And they seem to be gathered along threads and into clusters. And even when we look at other galaxies, so each galaxy is a puddle of stars, so the stars are orbiting kind of the center of the galaxy. And when we look closely at those stars, they're moving really fast.
Right.
And Newton told us, with gravity, All right, how fast you can look at, like we can look at how fast the moons of Jupiter orbit Jupiter, and we can calculate the mass of Jupiter by the speed of the orbits of the moons. It's a pretty straightforward calculation. And when we calculate the speeds that the stars have, when we calculate the mass that should be there, it's a lot bigger than the mass we can account for by all the other stars.
Right.
And so there has to be some kind of matter that it exerts a gravitational pull on the stars, but it doesn't glow. It doesn't show up. So it's dark matter. Mm-hmm. And this dark matter seems to be distributed into these threads and clusters and into this web network of galaxies and clusters of galaxies. And so what I'm actually studying is I'm looking at one thread, the Pisces-Perseus supercluster. So it's a bunch of clusters of galaxies lined up out from us, and the galaxies are moving so fast that they should fly away. They shouldn't all be hanging out. So we're trying to look at their speeds and figure out the mass of this dark matter thread that they're aligned with.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. And the Reverend, do you have anything you want to address before we continue with, the talk of dark matter and all the physics language that we've learned so fast?
Well, I would like to mention that we have a hymn that we sing in our hymnal, and the words are, where do we come from? What are we?
Right.
Where are we going?
Right.
To me, the most profound question in there is the last one. Where are we going?
Right.
And that's the more immediate answer. And that's what excites me about social movements for justice.
Right.
For whether it's LGBTQ+, whether it's Black Lives Matter. The question is, we have evolved to this place where we have empathy, right, where we can sense a love that is not just the love may have for you or for my wife or my children, but a love that is grander, bigger, more radical, that we can sense this. And I think, at least for me, it's pulling us, luring us, inviting us to make the world fairer, right, to make the world more just. Right. How can we pull the arc of the moral universe, right, towards justice? That's what excites me. That's what I think faith calls us to. Whether you're Jewish or Christian or Islam or Unitarian Universalist, whatever you are, I think that's where many of us agree on.
Right. And so, the beauty of all of this is, by learning about where we come from, we can then make clear decisions about where we're heading.
Well,
hopefully.
I mean, one of the things is that we all emerged, all humans emerged from this incredible process of evolution that gave us differences. Mm-hmm. And if you look at the trajectory of evolution, right, that we went from pond scum to fish to amphibians to reptiles to on and on. And life gets more and more diverse. Mm-hmm. And in Earth's history, there have been times when almost everything died, but a few critters survived and repopulated the Earth, and then they almost all died again. And then and the thing is that the stability comes with diversity. The more diversity in life there is, the less likely everything is going to die. And so the more diversity among humanity there is, the less likely that any idea that is good and that bends the arc of history toward justice is going to die.
So even within
science, diversity
physics,
is
you can
better.
find the beauty of diversity.
Absolutely.
That's great. I think that's a great note to end on. I would love to ask more questions that
We could sit here for
boggle the mind, but I think that was a great point to finish on. And so I want to thank both of you guys for taking your time to speak with me. Thank you to the audience for being here, and thank you everyone for tuning in. We'll see you guys soon. Thanks so much.
All right. Thank you.